Hello, my name's Catherine Mossman. Today is February 2nd, 2022, a day before Billy's birthday. Just wanted to do this little presentation for everybody based on an article Billy wrote back in 2008 called Ohne Arbeit oder sonstig wertvolle Tätigkeit vergangenen Dimension. It was turned into one of the gratis Schriften series of books that Semyasi Silver Star Center puts out. And it looks like this. And it's something I translated some time ago and have put now into this presentation. So hopefully you'll find this of use or interesting. Here we go. Idleness in life equals wasting away. Idleness not only contributes to the wasting away of the human being, but also irrevocably to senility in old age or retirement. Fundamentally, to be in a state of inactivity, idleness, unwillingness to work, as well as an old age retirement of every kind and wise is a very bad idea, because inaction makes people ill, psychically, consciously based, and physically, and drives them out of their useful social functionality. People, women and men, young and old, who indulge in idleness in life or who, as pensioners and in retirement, live an inactive life usually fall into a serious identity crisis. People who do nothing during their lives very often become addicted to alcohol or drugs and fall into asocial excesses, whereas people who are idle in their retirement feel useless. And very many of those who are idle in life, as well as many people in old age retirement, lose the joy of life and commit suicide. And especially among pensioners, the suicide rate is very high and surpasses all other age groups. The fact is that for all men, women, young people of all ages, as well as pensioners and people suffering from all kinds of illnesses who are idle in life, new role models are of necessity through which an affirmation of life permeates them, which can be taken into consideration primarily through reasonable activity and corresponding tasks. Humans who are idle in life, or who, after receiving their pension, live their retirement in such a wise that they only pursue inactivity, erroneously regard life and old age as a great struggle and as a massacre. However, this has nothing to do with the reality and truth, for this kind of attitude arises solely and exclusively from the misguided mode of life of these people. Truthfully, life is neither a struggle nor a massacre, but a joy and a path of progress and evolution. But all those who complain about life and its situations, etc., be it with regard to a lack of health, missing or inadequate interpersonal relationships, lack of money, etc., they shape their lives themselves. Their respective situations, their behavior, their work, or their inactivity are all shaped by them, because every individual is the architect of their own destiny. If they therefore suffer, then they create that suffering themselves. Their financial debts, their quarrel with other people, with their partner, a friend, acquaintances, or other fellow human beings. And if they are ill, then it is also their own attitude and their behavior as to how they face up to their illness. Simply suffering, grumpy, sniveling, self-pitying, or brave, patient, good sense of feeling, of health, of healing and progress, etc. That is all up to them. The fact is that those who are idle in life, as well as many retired people of old age, to whom also a large number of early retirees belong, makes the escape from life the central purpose of their lives, as well as their consciousness-based psychical and physical as well as health-based decay. The whole is truly a peculiar and cowardly self-centeredness, in that a fixation on one's own suffering, unpleasant situations, and life circumstances takes place, and every initiative for a meaningful occupation is destroyed from the bottom up. And in this respect, age does not play a role, nor does the gender of the person, because fundamentally the only thing that matters is the entire attitude towards life and its duties, which says, who rests, rusts. Or in English, I suppose we could say, use it or lose it. This is precisely the case, however, for those people who pursue their lives in idleness, as also, however, for many early retirees and pensioners of both sexes when, with a complete lack of initiative, they sink into doing nothing, miserable vegetation, and cowardly surrendering themselves to all kinds of suffering and to the dwindling courage to live is what results. In this wise, cowardly weariness, cowardly self-pity, and ultimately cowardly suicide emerge in order to escape through cowardice all that is not mastered due to their own lack of initiative and irresponsibility. This is a hard but true truth, even if it is denied by those affected, as well as by antagonistic know-it-alls, critics, deniers of truth, and mollycoddled false humanists who seek to stomp this fact into the ground. Despite this, the fact remains. Those who rest end up rusting, so to speak. And those who abandon themselves to idleness during their lives as early retirees or as pensioners fall victim to vices, to addictions, and to all kinds of physical, health consciousness-based and psychological suffering, as well as grumpiness and weariness for life, etc. These unvalues, however, lead to blatant misery and very often end in suicide, very high rates of which are exhibited among those who are idle, the lacking initiative ones, who do nothing, or I should say lacking in initiative ones. The life expectancy constantly increases, whereby, however, the sense and responsibility for healthy activity diminishes ever more, because more and more people are clamoring for early retirement and forever wanting to have shorter working hours and work only part-time. Many assume that they must leave their professional or other activity-based career behind them at an early age in order to indulge as soon as possible in doing nothing. But many also assume that they can master their lives through alcohol, drugs, or medication addictions as well. For earlier generations, the daily work was useful, which was maintained and carried out into old age. Idleness in life was alien to them, for without work, there was no healthy, valuable, and progressive existence. When old age came, there was a short moment of taking a breather, quote unquote, on the bench, with a little less work, before death swung his scepter. However, today, the taking a breather is already strived for during the highly active phase of life. Thus, this inactive, part-time, or post-professional state of inactivity already comprises a third or quarter, sometimes even half of the lifespan. In and of itself, thus many think, people should actually be happy and lucky in this wise, but this is not the case, and cannot be the case either, because doing nothing brings suffering and harm of many forms. Indeed, today, at least in the industrialized countries, a large proportion of old age pensioners are financially well placed, as are many others who are still in their pre-retirement years and health-wise have no or only a few complaints to mention. But suddenly, the identity crisis is there because, through self-created inactivity, they are stricken and are not or no longer carrying out anything sensible in life. The inactivity suddenly gets on the nerves, on the attitude and the behavior, and instead of the great freedom of doing nothing, one is henceforth threatened with desperate emptiness, thoughts and feelings of uselessness. Thus, all those fall into grouchiness and into an identity crisis who have the plan and falsely suppose that they could rest in life or at retirement age and thereby be happy and lucky. With inactivity, be it woman or man, young or old, the human being loses control over himself, herself, and indeed the reason being that they become overwhelmed with their inactivity and lack of concernment. Interhuman relationships crumble and eventually vanish in order to give way to disinterest and coldness towards the environment and the fellow human beings. In the state of doing nothing during life or in or before retirement, the entire status of life is lost, as well as the structured daily routine, which ultimately ends with the collapse of the social network of relationships and the loss of the person into himself, herself, seeming useless and worthless and putting an end to his/her life by force. The connection is that thoughts and feelings burden and bring the psyche and consciousness into upheaval in such a wise that the human being is thereby no longer needed. Consequently, they feel superfluous, alone, and helpless and useless in terms of the activities of daily life. Many people of this kind, whether woman or man, young or old, are not even able to provide for themselves in an appropriate and human-worthy wise, or even to prepare a meal, or to see to their own laundry, let alone that they know how to do something useful and rational with their free time. Countless idlers, work eschewers, early retirees, and pensioners only sit in front of the television for half or whole days and consume any imbecility and nonsense that flickers on their TV screens. Thereby, however, they promote their imaginary uselessness, which makes them lapse into any addictions and vices from which they can no longer free themselves. In this regard, be it alcohol, drugs, medicines, pleasures, disputes, hatred, jealousy, self-pity, or whatever. The identity becomes fragile and creates a great deal of insecurity, whereby self-esteem deteriorates more and more, which is also only oriented towards what has been done and what has not been done. Idleness and doing nothing and retirement are repulsive words for any reasonable and always productive person who devotes himself/herself to useful work or any other valuable activity, be it man, woman, young, or old. If a person is not productive through useful activities that make reasonable use of him or her, then this means that already during their lifetime they shovel their own grave and climb down into it. The truth is that a person feels that his/her identity is determined and confirmed by their work or other valuable activity and the resulting reward and value therein. But if they only cultivate idleness, doing nothing, or simply living the retired life of a retiree, then they lose their identity. One who leads their life as an idle and do-nothing person, or a person who is withdrawn from their life as a result of early retirement or age-related retirement, inevitably and unexpectedly falls into an identity crisis unless they connect themselves, through their own initiative, with some valuable work or activity that keeps their self-worth aloft and does not allow it to sink. Many people, women, men, young and old, find it difficult to cope with work and also with responsibility in relation to their own physicality, as well as with suffering, illness, loss, etc., whereby the male sex is definitely more affected by this than the female. The male gender is mainly oriented towards its power and strength as well as sexual potency, which are increasingly questioned, however, the less useful work is performed. And thus also the bodily fitness is severely impaired, which especially degenerates when alcohol and drugs are used or when a medication addiction exists. And if work, the mental block or consciousness, thoughts, feelings, and psyche, as well as the bodily fitness are neglected, then this also is drawn into retirement age, when retirement is imminent and the evil of neglecting work, as well as physical and mental fitness, takes its toll. Thus, very little passes by people that leaves them unscathed, and this carries on into old age, and indeed especially because many suppress the importance of life and thus create underground fears in themselves that persist throughout life. Thus, emotions, however, as also thoughts and feelings, as well as love, affection, and friendships, etc., are neglected, suppressed, and repressed, whereby the playing out of all of these values is not possible if the human being forfeits in this man, woman, young or old, their role model of life. And this falls into question if they have maintained this feeling of being mentored or having some kind of meaning. Sooner or later, they are in danger of actually being sidelined in life. In this wise, so to speak, people make themselves into human, bulky waste because they hang about, being useless, and stand in the way of all those who consciously, honestly, and seriously strive for the fulfillment of life's duty. Thus, they hinder the evolution of all those who fulfill life in a good wise and are consciously devoted to the progress and the evolution. And they cannot do anything about human bulky waste who do not allow themselves to be instructed and are not willing to live the life of the rightful, but only lament, suffer, and do not strive for improvement. Thus, what remains left for them is to do their human duty in the wise that they care for the unteachable, cosset them, and do everything possible to keep them alive and somehow guarantee them a life that alleviates their self-created suffering and ultimately allows them to die a humane death. The idleness, the inactivity of many women and men, young and old alike, often leads not only to the aforementioned evils, but also to the fact that entered into and existing marital relationships break up and lead to divorce, because one partner no longer tolerates the inactivity and helplessness of the other and wants to go their own way in order to be able to really and truthfully live. Thus, it is necessary that men and women also learn manual skills in relation to work and other activities in order to be a support to the other partner and to be able to helpfully stand by them. This also refers therein that one must learn to establish one's own and common social relationships and to develop manual, mental, consciousness, and feeling-based as well as psychological competencies. In a connecting relationship, and indeed no matter how it is formed, it is necessary that the partners deal with each other and are prepared to accept without complaint the specific infrastructure belonging to their field of interest or the organizational and real care and benefits in the existing connection. The older people become, the more aggrieved and victimized are their reactions to aging and age itself, and this in turn is a strong impulse to fall for massive addictions and vices, especially alcohol and drugs, as well as medications that numb the consciousness. Out of which, however, ensues mental and emotional based impoverishment, as well as social isolation, whereby in many cases suicide is the ultimate result, and indeed both by men and women, although the increased suicidal tendencies predominate in men, especially with increasing age and very sharply after retirement. Interesting statistic. Men age 85 and older take their life at a rate 4 times higher than any other US population group. Didn't know that. Continuing on. And actually, the number of suicides is very sharply increasing in this day and age because more people find no sense in life and become weary of it. Truly, people are becoming more and more impoverished with regard to a consciousness and responsible evolution. Consequently, they are false humanistic and incapable of life and simply seek a wrongly hoped for redemption in suicide. People's suicide is belittled in a scandalous manner, and yet even promoted by the state by allowing irresponsible ones lusting for murder to apply their craft of indirect assisted suicide. Suicide has generally become a symptom of a very widespread crisis of meaning, for a falsely conceived senselessness of life, and indeed both among young people as also pensioners, but especially among the latter. As already previously mentioned, alcoholism, medication abuse, and drug addiction play an important role, which, however, is generally hushed up or ignored altogether, although these are alarm signals for a failing psychological state. As the world population grows out of control, the more impersonal, strange, and indifferent people become to each other. As a result, the loneliness of the individual, as well as the vices of idleness, consciousness, and parasitic inactivity and aversion to work become pre-programmed. Thus also, however, the abandonment of all work and activity, as well as mental and physical exercise during the pre-retirement life and after retirement. That, whilst early retirees and old age retirees are put into nursing homes and old age homes and subjected to psychotropic drugs to keep them quiet. As a result, not too much work accrues for them. However, this does not help in any wise, quite the contrary, because people young and old who are put into institutions and homes and have no tasks, no work, and no other valuable activity rot hopelessly, decline, and become ill. The young and the old people affected in this manner are discharged from their lives and their tasks, And this is precisely the main factor leading to serious depression, but also, however, to rebellion against the state system, social order, and the law, etc. Further, this is not surprising because via the entirety of these forms of dealing with those who are idle, work reluctant, inactive, addicted, and immoral, as well as with the early retirees and old age retirees, an orientation towards the future is lacking. Indeed, exceptions exist among old age retirees, but these exceptions are steadily diminishing because more and more the elderly are only becoming spectators with regard to the real life, which takes place outside their sphere of influence. However, this equally applies to those on the sidelines who are addicted to alcohol, drugs, and medicines, those who shun work, those who are inactive, and those who are idle. Truly, no one honestly waits for them, for no one expects anything still valuable from them. Thus, in a social sense, they are simply written off as defunct. However, early retirees and old age pensioners are just as often relegated to the scrap heap and excluded from any responsibility with regard to societal involvement. And this has a consequence that an existential emptiness arises, just as it does for ones who are addicts, immoral, work shunners, inactive, and idle. All these people, young and old, are not adequately, if at all, positioned in the midst of society and not in the public spaces where they are able to participate responsibly. Social participation is completely denied them, and even though the human being is a social being and only really develops himself, herself properly through their positive and responsible actions in the community, truly, as responsible human beings, we cannot afford that all these young and old people stand offside only because they have fallen outside the social fabric or into retirement age. It is therefore necessary to develop an appropriate culture in which all these people are involved and can live their lives in a social way. This is just a little snippet from a Michigan Committee on Juvenile Justice. So they're saying the same thing. Get them involved. Truly, as responsible human beings, we cannot afford that all these young and old people stand offside only because they have fallen outside the social fabric or into retirement age. It is therefore necessary to develop an appropriate culture in which all these people are involved and can live their lives in a social way. The young outcasts must not simply be discarded, just as those in old age retirement must not simply withdraw or be made to withdraw, but should still have to deal with everything conceivably possible in relation to work and other valuable activities, and indeed also in social terms, within society and also in politics. All kinds of work of those who are sidelined must be guided and taught by governmental efforts about right and positive life conduct in order that they find their way out of their addictions, out of their vices, from their aversion to work, their inactivity, and from their idleness in order to find a rightful life through work and societal life, while the retired young and old must be protected from any discrimination that deems them unfit for social, societal, and political activities. Any exclusion of human beings from social life and society is criminal and in no way fit for the future. All prosperity of humanity depends on the creativity and on the innovation capability, i.e., the capability for renewal and change, of the planned and controlled change and reform in the social system through new ideas, techniques, technologies, and political progress, etc. They must be spoken to and treated as jointly responsible and engaged persons who can occupy a position that is rightful for them in public life. Thus, it is not enough that societal outcasts like addicts, corrupt ones, work eschewers, fake invalids, idle ones, and other inactive and malingering ones be simply given horrendous stipends or benefits, and to raise the pensions of the elderly while they are abandoned and excluded from the usual work and activity process. With those who are outcasts and with the old age pensioners, it is not a question of using them against their will as gap fillers for any work and activities, etc., but to instruct them concerning their responsibility and to show them ways and give them opportunities so that they can be engaged in worthwhile activity and not fall into depression, addiction, and vice, etc. This does not mean that gainful employment is necessarily practiced, but a job or any activity through which the consciousness, thoughts, feelings, psyche, and body can be kept healthy and also freed from or hindered of addictions, vices, and depression. And when people in their young and middle age years or in their pre-retirement or old age pensioners' life pursue a job or other valuable activity, then new freedoms in many kinds of directions are consistently available to them. And if the execution of a job or other valuable activity is done in voluntariness and freedom, then all constraints disappear and new valuable perspectives open up again and again. In this wise, everyday life is no longer characterized by a programmed system and by competition through which an unrecognized developmental potential in terms of creativity often comes to light. This, however, is a new freedom that applies equally for men and women, as well as for young and old people who are living in retirement. And with that, we just finish off with saying, and indeed it is in the hands of every person themselves to change their life to a better one, to give them a new knack through a decent job or other valuable activity, because everyone is the smith of their own destiny. I thank you very much, and we thank Billy very much for all his hard work. And until next time, Salome, Catherine.